In this video, I'm going to cover long lines of code and how to break them up into multiple lines. So Python has special rules when you have a single long line of code and would like to break it up onto multiple lines. This is another place where white space matters, and you can't just press enter and move to the next line. So let me show you this, say this long line of code here where we're adding together the numbers 1 through 20. This is one long line of code. It's perfectly valid. I can go ahead and execute this and look at the result. But let's just say I want to take this long line of code, and since it's quite long, it might run off the side of the screen over here if it gets too long. But let's just say I want to take this line of code and write it on multiple lines. So let's break it up. Let's say I want to write it like this. Okay, so I have 1 to 7 over here. I just keep adding it like this. So this is not possible, and if I try to execute this, I'm going to get a syntax error. So what Python does, if you want to write one long line of code onto multiple lines, you have to do one of two things. You have to either end the line with a backslash or wrap all of the code in parentheses. So if we take a look over here, the end of line, we have to tell Python, all right, we're moving to a new line like this and put a backslash over there at the end of each of the lines that we're breaking up. You cannot put any space over here to the right. Notice that the cursor is here, and if I press an arrow key, it'll go automatically to the next line. So that's how you do this. So let me just go ahead and execute this, and this is valid. And when you do this, it basically just extends the line. So any space over here, I did say that space matters in the beginning, but not when you break up a long line of code like this. The beginning space doesn't matter. In fact, you can put any amount of space over here and any space between the characters. That all is the same thing. I just executed again. You just cannot have a space after the backslash. So if I put some spaces here, I will get a syntax error, and it says character after line continuation character. So I need to delete those empty spaces like that to have it working again. And so that's one way. Let's go ahead and write it another way. So instead of using these backslashes, what you can do is wrap your code in parentheses like this. I'm going to wrap this code and put parentheses around all of the operation that I'm doing over here. And this is another way to do it. And this time I can have any amount of space I want at the very end. It doesn't matter. And that will all still work. So it treats this as that same one line of code. So in Python, it's important to distinguish a logical line of code from a physical line of code. I think a physical line of code is easier to understand. A physical line of code is exactly what you see. So over here, or we can just take this last example, we have 1, 2, and 3 physical lines of code. That's what you actually see on your screen. You could consider this one another one, but let's say just for the operation itself, we have 3 physical lines of code. This is actually one logical line of code. We just broke it up into a single, or we just broke it up into 3 lines of code, physical lines of code. So a logical line of code is how Python processes your code. So it first figures out where is the logical end. It could end on a different physical line, but it'll just read all of this in as one line, and it executes one logical line of code at a time. It doesn't matter how many physical lines of code that it takes. It could take 10 physical lines of code, but it's going to read it in as one logical line. So that's what it figures out first. So an analogy here is a long sentence that goes on multiple lines. So you can think of the sentence as a logical line of code. And here's one sentence I just took from Wikipedia about the Python programming language. And this sentence goes on 3 physical lines, but it's still just one sentence ending over here in a period. So, in the English language, we end our sentences with a period. That's when we know that it is over. In Python, if we want to put it on multiple lines, we have to either use a backslash or wrap the whole thing in parentheses like I did here. So hopefully this analogy helps out. The sentence is a logical line. The actual lines you see are the physical lines of code. So that is the difference between those two. All right, so that wraps it up for long lines of code.